I didn't know what I wanted to speak about this week until I learned that this week's Parsha was Alex Pomerantz's Bar Mitzvah Parsha, and he said he would lend me the copy of his Dvar Torah from when he was 13, so I figured I'd just read it. Just kidding. Rabbi, what does Judaism have to say about free will? It's not such an easy question to be asked when you're walking in the neighborhood with your daughter on a really sunny day, and yet it happened pretty recently. And I'm quite cautious about answering questions that begin with, what does Judaism say about? Because, well, Judaism says a lot, and sometimes it says things that conflict with each other. But I'm interested in the question because, besides it being an interesting theological, philosophical question, the stakes are feeling very high. Speaking to a lot of folks this week, I've heard a shared feeling by many of despair, or as the kids say, it's been a lot. An ongoing war in Gaza and Israel, hostages still not home. A presidential debate raising difficult questions about leadership. And early this week, a gut punch in the form of multiple Supreme Court decisions weakening protections against our climate and the rule of law. It's time to protest, and yet it's a lot. What can we do? We're a congregation. Our mission statement says we're committed to seeking Jewish answers to life's big questions and to pursuing justice. And yet in the face of forces that just feel beyond our control, how are we called to respond? In what ways does Judaism call upon us to act? And in what ways are we being told to simply get out of the way? This week's Parsha asks and begins to answer some of these questions. If you're reading this week's Parsha and you find yourself having trouble following the flow of the story, that's to be expected. Because when you take a close look at this week's Parsha, contemporary biblical scholars understand that the story of Korach's rebellion, it's really probably multiple separate stories that are being woven together into one chapter, into one somewhat cohesive story. But in the story as we receive it today, we're told of two groups that complain against Moses and Aaron. First, two men named Datan and Aviram come to Moses and inform him that they will refuse to continue to follow his lead. Datan and Aviram are descendants of Reuven, the firstborn of Jacob. Perhaps they feel that as firstborns, they should be leaders. Why should they have to listen to Moses? And in the second instance, Korach, a member of the Levite tribe, confronts Moses and Aaron along with 250 elders of the Israelite community. You've gone too far, Korach says. For all the community is holy, all of them, and God is in their midst. Why then do you, Moses and Aaron, raise yourselves above the congregation? Korach also has a point. In the book of Exodus, God called the Israelites a mamlechet kohanim, a nation of priests. So why would Moses and Aaron need to hold an elevated status above a community where each person is meant to serve as a priest, where each person is called to lead? In response to the challenges, Moses and Aaron, taking direction from God, take decisive action. Moses suggests that each of the 250 elders, Korach and also Aaron, take fire pans and make offerings to God to see which offering will be accepted. When they come to do this very thing, the very next morning, God's presence enters the camp, and God instructs Aaron to take a step back. God then causes a fire to blaze through the camp, consuming the 250 who attempted to make their own fire offerings. And in response to Datan and Aviram, Moses tells the community to take a step back, to remove themselves. And a hole opens up in the earth, swallows Datan, Aviram, and their families. These two stories of protest and punishment share a clear lesson. Moses and Aaron are leaders of the community. They are messengers on behalf of God. Challenge their authority in the community, and God will determine your fates. Rabbinical rabbis and classic commentators, they understand Korach and Datan and Aviram as charismatic leaders, as Rabbi Berg said, ultimately using manipulative tactics to try to overthrow communal order and shared purpose. And in this context, God's response is justified in teaching the community that respecting Moses and Aaron is the same as respecting God. But importantly to me, both stories share a significant detail. In both strands of this Korach, Datan, and Aviram's story, Moses and Aaron are instructed to physically stand back before each group of rebels meets their fate. It may seem like an insignificant detail, I suppose. God doesn't want to kill Moses and Aaron in the process of punishing the rebels. But Nachmanides, the 13th century Spanish commentator, also named Ramban, asks an essential and challenging question. He writes, God has the power to kill many people in a plague while sparing one righteous person in their midst. God was able to kill the firstborn of every Egyptian family in the book of Exodus, while allowing the rest of the family to survive. So if this is so, why does God need Moses and Aaron to remove themselves from Korach, from Datan and Aviram, in order to spare their own lives? And here Ramban offers two potential answers to why Moses and Aaron would need to remove themselves. First, perhaps the punishment was primarily meant to teach a lesson to the remaining Israelites about a challenge to communal authority. God wanted to create physical distance between the leaders and between Korach, so that the Israelites would see that only those who physically stood with Korach and supported his rebellion would be the ones who would be destroyed. And second, and I think this answer is equally compelling, Ramban suggests that though God could destroy Korach and his followers and spare Moses and Aaron, God refused to do so in order to honor the two righteous leaders. Put in other words, as long as Moses and Aaron remained in the camp, God would not allow the fire to rage, and the Israelites would be spared. I think that Ramban's two explanations maybe offer conflicting explanations, and this prevents a further challenge. For who's really in charge here? Is it God who can destroy those who represent evil and just simply ask Moses and Aaron to get out of the way? Or is it Moses and Aaron who decide if they should leave the situation or not? Did they actually control the fate of their adversaries? In the end of the story, is it predetermined? Or do Moses and Aaron have free will to guide what happens next? And deciding which one of Ramban's paths we take is not so clear. An early rabbinic collection, Pirkei Avot, teaches that there were 10 things created before the first Shabbat, at the very creation of the world. Some of these things include the rainbow at the end of the Noah's Ark story, the talking donkey of Bilam, and the well that provides sustenance to the Israelites during their journey through the desert. And one more of these things is the mouth of the earth that swallowed up Datan and Aviram and Korach. So if we accept this teaching of Pirkei Avot, the stories feel quite fatalistic. It suggests that God knew about the rebellion, even at the very beginning of the world, and knew that there would be violent means that would be needed to be employed to end it. In telling this story, the rebellion has already been written. The earth will consume all evil. Will Moses and Aaron go down with those who protested, or will they get out of the way? There's something perhaps comforting about this predetermined version of the story. God's the one who's ultimately in charge. Yes, there will be evil in the world, but yes, also, the means to destroy that evil has already been created. The plan is already in place. Sure, they will be demagogues who seek to gain status for themselves at the expense of the needs of their communities, but they also will find their fate in the end. God will swallow up evil, and justice will flow like a mighty stream. But in this story, there's no room for rehabilitation. There's no room for restorative justice. There's no possibility for Datan and Aviram to change their ways and to choose a different path. And in this story, leadership means getting out of the way, letting the predetermined story roll to the credits to the very end. But what if Ramban's second suggestion is true? That God would not kill anyone as long as Moses and Aaron stayed with the people. that God was willing to destroy those who challenged community stability, but at the same time, God was equally willing to follow the leaders who might choose a different path. And this is the explanation that animates a third story, one that occurs immediately after the first two we've been discussing this morning. The Israelite community is angry about all the death that's been occurring, and the full Israelite community approaches Moses and Aaron, and they cry out, "You've brought death among God's people." Now a third time, the authority of Moses and Aaron is being challenged. And once more, God instructs Moses and Aaron, "Remove yourself from this community that I may annihilate them in an instant." Now, this time, Aaron and Moses, they don't step back. Moses tells Aaron to make his own fire offering and to offer it as an atonement on behalf of the entire community. And then the Torah teaches, "Ve'yamod bein hametim u'bein hachayim v'te'atzar hamagefa." Aaron stood between the dead and the living until the plague was stopped. In this third occurrence, Aaron and Moses, they don't walk away and let their people be killed. They take action, and it's high-risk action. Aaron literally places his body in the midst of a plague and remains there until it stops. He puts his own self on the line, even in the defense of those who just challenged his own leadership and the leadership of Moshe. I can imagine Aaron's anger at those who blame him and his brother for the death they did not cause. But now Aaron and Moses had come to understand something new, it seems. Then in the situation where a community was about to be punished, they did have power to change the outcome of the events. The end of this story had not yet been written. It was in their hands. So they don't remove themselves. They draw near to the people, their flawed, stiff-necked people. And they pray. They offer atonement. They stand firm. It may be one of the most moving examples of leadership in our entire Torah. Aaron chooses to come closer instead of moving away. And in this action, he changes the course of the story. A Midrash teaches that at this very moment, when Aaron stood between the living and the dead, he encountered the angel of death. And Aaron grabbed hold of the angel of death and blocked his path. The angel of death said to Aaron, "Let me be so that I may carry out my commission." And Aaron responded, "Moses has bidden me to prevent you." The angel replied, "I'm the messenger of God, while you're the messenger of Moses." And Aaron retorted, "Moses does not say anything out of his own mind, but only at the command of the Almighty." In this story, the events of violence are not pre-created at the beginning of the world. Here, Aaron has the power to let the angel of death continue and spread the plague, or to continue to grab hold of him until it ends. So did Moses and Aaron gain courage between the first set of stories and the second? Perhaps. Perhaps they saw violence in their community, even against those that they thought were their adversaries, but they could no longer stand it. Perhaps they decided that next time they would not remove themselves regardless of the consequences. But here's the thing. There are some injustices in the world. There are some moments in life that we simply cannot control. And we know that in some situations, despite our best efforts, we can't change the story. The earth's going to open up. It's going to swallow everyone. And in those cases, we're allowed to, or we need to preserve ourselves. We need to get out of the way. We need to breathe. But in other cases, we have the power to change the narrative. To advocate, to protest, to lobby, to organize, to teach, to daven, to communicate, to sing. To stand our ground like Aaron and insist the violence will end. So are our lives predetermined, or do we have free will? Perhaps the Torah teaches that we've been given a little bit of both. And I suppose the discernment that we do in community is trying to figure out in which moment we are living in, moment to moment. Our sages teach, Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor, v'lo ata ben chorin lehibatel mimena. We're not obligated to complete the task, to end all injustice in the world. God is not asking us to let the earth swallow us up. But also, we're not free to desist from standing between the living and the dead when the opportunity is laid before us, when we have the power to change the story. Shabbat Shalom.